Welcome to episode number 59 of the Better with Brock podcast. I'm your host and online personal trainer and body transformation coach, Brock Ashby. Born in Christchurch, New Zealand, living in Sydney, Australia, coaching people all over the world, living the dream and absolutely loving it. So thanks for jumping onto the podcast. And in today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the best exercises for building muscle versus the worst exercises for building muscle. And it came down to one simple question. Does this exercise build muscle in a great way? Does it have a good stimulus to fatigue ratio? Is it a good bang per buck exercise? For the amount of time that I put in, am I getting a good potential to build muscle? That is how I decided these exercises. Now, I said these are the best and the worst exercises, but that was ultimately just to get you interested in this podcast. I'm actually going to give you a very nuanced and balanced perspective on why exercises are good for building muscle and why there could be better ones or maybe ones that you could probably stop doing. So without further chat, let's get into it. We're going to start with chest. First off, the hammer strength chest press machine. If you haven't used it before, it's a chest press machine that looks kind of blocky. It looks a bit cagey. You sit down, you can adjust the height of the seat at the bottom, and you load plates on each side. You push up and you push back. Well, not really up, you push out and you push back in. When you push out, it gets harder and harder and harder. And when you release it, it gets easier and easier and easier. I use this throughout pretty much my entire personal training career, myself and with my clients. So this exercise isn't one that you should completely stop doing and avoid because it still can help you to build muscle. The way that it's structured with its resistance profile, though, is probably just not the best. But this is getting pretty nitpicky, but I chose this as the worst exercise just to really bring a point up to you. When we're at the bottom of a chest exercise, when we're pressing, we want it to be the hardest. But with this exercise, it's actually the easiest. And then when we press out, that's where it's the hardest, but the chest is in the shortened position. We want it to be the hardest when the chest is in the stretched position because that is where we build the most muscle. So once again, it doesn't mean you can't do this exercise. It just means that there's probably a better way to go about working your chest when you're doing a pressing exercise. Which brings me to the best exercise for building muscle in your chest. Well, not really, but a really solid one. And it's a basic one that we've all been doing for years. And on the Modern Wisdom podcast of Chris Williamson, he's interviewed a lot of bodybuilders and asked them the 10 best exercises to build muscle. This came up in pretty much every list that he's asked them for. And it's the incline dumbbell chest press. But the grip that I recommend is a neutral grip, and let me explain why. So if you don't know what an incline dumbbell chest press machine is, incline dumbbell chest press with a neutral grip is, ultimately you'll get on the bench. I prefer to set it up at a 45-degree angle, but you can do 30 or 15 as well. I wouldn't go any higher than that, then that's going to be more of a shoulder press than a chest press. So I keep it at 45 degrees and I set up, and the dumbbells are in a neutral grip at the bottom where I start. So the reason they're a neutral grip is because if we went pronated, so as if you're playing piano or holding a barbell, pronated, the balls on the end of the dumbbell where the weights are going to hit your chest and prevent you from getting full range of motion. If you twist the dumbbells to a neutral grip where your hands, as if they were holding a gear stick, are neutral, the weights of the dumbbell are at the top and at the bottom or the side of your body, so you can get full range of motion and get a nice deep stretch in the chest. Now, with the dumbbells, it's the same weight at the top than it is at the bottom. So unlike the hammer strength chest press machine, it's nice and hard at the bottom position of the chest press. So you're getting this nice deep stretch of the chest, full range of motion because you have a neutral grip. And it's nice and heavy at the bottom, so we're going to build the most muscle out of each rep. A little key technical point of the incline dumbbell chest press is when you're coming down, you want to push up and in because with the chest, we know that it presses, but it also flies as well. We have the cable crossover fly, we have incline flies, we have decline dumbbell chest flies. There's a ton of flies that we can do, but it goes from out to in. So it does something that we call adduction. It adds to your center line. That's how I remember. It's how I remember it. So as it adds into the body, we can kind of do a similar thing when we're pressing to increase the chance of building muscle by just that little bit. So when I press the incline dumbbell chest press at my clients, I like to inform them on pressing up and then going slightly in at the top. So it's like it's up and in. So it's a slight arc. Instead of just pressing up and down, you press up and in. And that's another benefit to the dumbbells as well, is you have that freedom of movement. When you're on the chest press machine, you can just go where the machine allows you to go. Moving on from the chest, we're going to look at shoulders. The worst exercise that you should never do in your life. Just joking. The dumbbell anterior raise. This exercise is actually a completely fine exercise, but the target muscle that it's hitting is one that we most probably don't even need to train on shoulder day unless it's a lagging muscle group that you want to bring up specifically. The dumbbell anterior raise, you bring up in an anterior fashion, which means straight up. That hits the anterior head of the deltoid, or the front of the deltoid. The thing is, I don't really believe in training this muscle in isolation because it gets hit so much in compound exercises that we do. The barbell overhead press, dumbbell overhead press, shoulder press machine, a shoulder push-up if you know what that is, these all hit predominantly the anterior head of the deltoid. But on chest day, if you're doing bench press, tricep dip, chest press machine, push-ups, even flies to some degree, that also hits the anterior head of the deltoid. So it's getting hit a lot throughout the week without you even focusing on it. That's why I think the dumbbell anterior raise doesn't really need to be done. I got a lot of flack on Facebook for saying that, but I still stand by it. But if you have really weak dumbbell anterior raises, then go ahead, knock yourself out. The head of the deltoid that I believe we really should be training is the lateral head of the deltoid. And that's also what most people want when they train shoulders. They want that superhero wide 3D shoulder look. And that comes from training the lateral head of the deltoid. And that means we have to do lots of lateral raises. And the best exercise for shoulders that I actually really enjoy is behind the back cable lateral raises. And the reason that I think this is one of the best exercises is not only because it's a lateral raise that hits the lateral head of the deltoid, which gives you wider shoulders, it's actually one that most people haven't done. So when you first do an exercise, your body's going to be really sensitive to that stimulus. So you can get quite a lot of muscle growth stimulus from that. So I'm a real big fan of it. But also the resistance profile is different to the standard dumbbell lateral raise that we all know. Standing there, arms out the side, the dumbbell lateral raise, that's hardest at the top when your lateral head of the deltoid is in the shortened position, which is okay. But as you know from the first exercise that I talked about, the hamstrings chest press machine, where that was hardest in the shortest position for the chest as well, what we really want is it to be hardest when the muscle is in the lengthened position. And this is one of the only lateral raises that has that specific characteristic, where it's hardest where the lateral head of the deltoid is in the lengthened position at the bottom. So ultimately, if you're not watching this on YouTube and you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can't see this, but ultimately what you do is you walk into a cable cell, you put the cables all the way down to the bottom, and you put handles on the attachments. With your left hand, behind your back, you're going to grab the right cable. You walk over to the left, you grab the left cable with your right hand, so behind you, there's an X being made. And then you take about one step out, and then you just do your standard lateral raises. Now, as you raise, there should be a cross behind you because you're putting the cable that was on the left side that's being lifted by your right hand, and then the cable on the right should be lifted by your left hand. I hope you're following me here. But as you lift, because the cables are constantly pulling down, it's actually the hardest at the bottom of the lateral raise. And if you think of if you're doing a dumbbell lateral raise, it's the hardest at the top. At the bottom, if you're just using dumbbells, it's actually really easy to get half reps. But with this unique behind the back cable lateral raise, it's actually really hard at the bottom of the rep. So it has a different resistance profile. A real killer superset with these that I play around with a lot is going behind the back cable lateral raise, 8 to 10 reps. And then you, as soon as you finish, you pick up some dumbbells and you do your lateral raises there. So you go hardest in the lengthened position, superset with hardest in the shortened position. It's a real burner. It gets a crazy pump in your shoulders. And if you want to build your shoulders, I'd really recommend doing that, especially for the lateral head of the deltoid. So there's our shoulders. Now we're moving on to triceps. Single arm dumbbell kickback is legitimately one of the worst exercises you can do for triceps. And that's when you prop up on a bench, you put one knee up, one leg down on the floor, you get your elbow up to your side and you straighten it and bend it. Straighten it and bend it. It's a single arm dumbbell kickback. The reason that I'm not a huge fan is you're actually bringing your elbow back towards your butt in a horizontal way. But gravity goes down. So you're not really opposing gravity to make it harder when you're using a dumbbell, because you're pulling a dumbbell horizontally instead of vertically. So, for example, if I'm doing a back squat, gravity's pushing the barbell down, I'm taking on that weight, going down on my squat, and then pushing up against gravity. So that means it's a good deal if we're trying to build muscle, because we're directly pushing against the force or the weight that we're trying to. So, our force that we're pushing up against is directly opposing the weight. However, if we do a single arm dumbbell kickback, we're pushing our arm back, yet gravity's pushing it down. So it's not directly opposing it. That's why with a single arm dumbbell kickback, we can't really do that much weight. And if we go heavier, it doesn't necessarily mean the exercise is harder for the tricep, because the triceps is trying to push it back. It's not going to actually oppose gravity and make it harder and harder and harder. The best way to do that exercise specifically is with a cable. And the reason it's better with a cable is because a cable pulls from the origin of where you set it up. So you can set it up at about hip height, and then when you push away with the kickback, it's still going to be opposing your tricep, as opposed to gravity pushing down and you pushing pretty much sideways to gravity and not really making it harder. So single arm dumbbell kickback, a bit of a waste of time if you ask me for your triceps, but one of the best exercises as a tricep builder would have to be the tricep dip. It's like what the pull-up is to the back, what the push-up is to the chest, the tricep dip is to the triceps. But the reason that I do like tricep dips is for many reasons. So let's start with the first one. You get a bit of a motivational boost when you hit your first bodyweight tricep dip. It's a milestone. It's like when you first get your first pull-up, or when you first bench 2 plates, when you first get your first push-up. These little milestones in our lifting careers that we get that just kind of kick us along and keep our motivation nice and high. And I feel like getting your first tricep dip bodyweight is one of those moments. So you can do assisted with bands or with an assisted dip machine until you can get your first bodyweight tricep dip, and then that's like a real win. And then when you can get 5 to 6, even 8 at bodyweight, then you can start discovering how much you can do when you add weight to your tricep dip, and that's a real motivation kicker. That really gets you going when you're doing weighted dips. So that's a really good reason. The second one is for a tricep exercise, it's a really good one to really increase load. So as I said, you go from assisted to bodyweight to weighted. And as you get weighted, you can slowly increase the weight by wearing a weight vest, putting a dumbbell between your legs, or wearing a weight belt and attaching plates. Another cool feature of the tricep dip, which I love, is you can lean slightly forward to do a chest dip. Now, a chest dip is still heavily a tricep compound exercise, but you can sneak in some extra lower chest training volume, or the costal part of the chest, which is really cool. And when you lean forward, it kind of becomes more like a neutral grip dumbbell chest press, and you can actually lift a bit more weight. Well, that's definitely what I've found specifically with my body. I can do chest dip a lot more weight than I can with the standard tricep dip where I'm nice and upright. So if you do want to focus purely on just building up your triceps, a nice upright body doing a tricep dip, that's what you want. If you want to get a little bit of lower chest volume in there as well and do the chest dip, then you would bring your chest slightly forward, have a bit more bent over torso, and that way your legs would come back a bit more so you get some extra lower chests. And a lot of guys want to work on their lower chest, so that's why I would recommend the chest dip. I think it's a very solid option.
When I first thought of doing a podcast in 2019, I wrote down everything that I wanted to achieve with the show. And one thing I never wrote down was to spam you with ads of products that I never really used myself. However, I did write down that I wanted to grow it as big as possible and have as many interesting people on the show as I could. To help make that happen, all I ask is that you leave a review on the podcast platform that you're listening to this episode on and share it with someone that you know it will benefit. If you want to support myself even further, and more importantly, your body transformation, and are interested in having me as your coach to help you achieve the results that you just can't seem to achieve on your own, you can visit teambrockashby.com to see what program fits you best. Back to the show.
Cool. Moving on to lats. The worst exercise, and I stand by this too, this is legitimately one of the worst exercises. It's the lat pull down, but it's when they do it side to side. So they got their arms up, right? Like they're holding a lat pull down machine. If you're watching the video, you can see this. If you're just listening, try and imagine this. So you're setting up for a lat pull down, you get your legs underneath, you make it nice and tight so you're stuck, and then you have your pronated grip. But then instead of pulling both arms down at the same time, you grab your left arm and you just pull that one down to one side and then you release it. And then you go right, back up. Left arm down, left arm back up. Right arm down, right arm back up. Absolutely stupid, if you ask me. Now, look, it's a bit of a different story if you're doing a single arm lat pull down and you have cable attachments up top, because that is legitimately what that exercise is. You can get a nice deep stretch by stretching out the side and pulling down and getting a good squeeze at the bottom. But if you're just doing a pronated bar and doing it side to side, you're not really doing what it's for. So the reason that it's stupid is, well, number one, it just looks stupid. But number two, you can't actually lift as much weight as you can if you're just grabbing a cable and using one hand. And it's less stable because you have one hand in the air that's just dangling, doing nothing. Now, one of the best exercises to do is your chin up, neutral grip. That feels amazing. Now, a neutral grip often feels better for people's shoulders. When people jump into pronated things, often their rotator cuff doesn't feel the best, which is why when we do dumbbell chest press, it's often better with a neutral grip. Dumbbell overhead press, it's often better with a neutral grip. Chin-ups, same thing. It often feels better with a neutral grip. There's just something about the neutral grip that feels better about the shoulders as opposed to a pronated grip. That doesn't mean we avoid it, because we can play around with different grips to add variation to our training and strengthen up different muscles. However, it's usually better if we do a neutral grip in terms of comfort on our shoulder and also weight we can lift. So with the chin up, once again, it has that same benefit as the tricep dip. You get your first and it feels amazing. Your first bodyweight chin up. I recently just took one of my clients here that I'm training face-to-face in Sydney. We went from doing band-assisted chin-ups and not being able to do any bodyweight chin-ups to last night when we trained, we did, not last night, the start of the week. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. We did 4 sets of 8 at bodyweight. Massive, massive transformation strength-wise. So really cool. So you get that benefit. The pat on the back that you get from doing your first bodyweight chin-up is always a really good one. And then you have that question next. How much weight can I add on to my chin-up now? And that's when you fully are in boss mode and you're taking over the gym doing weighted chin-ups. It's always a really good sight to see. Something that people get wrong technique-wise with the chin-up is they often try to just get their chin above the bar. That's what a chin-up is. You put your chin above the bar, tick, you've got the rep. But I want you to look at it differently. I want you to think of driving your elbows to the floor instead. When we drive our elbows to the floor, that helps us use our lats. Now, our lats are stronger than our biceps. So we want to leverage them to get us above the bar. And we do that by hanging from a really dead hang and then driving your elbows down to the floor. And you'll realize that when you pull your elbows all the way down and you tuck them underneath, your chin is above your hands. That means your chin is going to be above the bar if you successfully pull your elbows down into your back pockets as deep as you can. It's a really great exercise for building muscle. You can do it body weight for a ton of reps and add progressive overload that way. So week 1, maybe you do 10 reps, and then week 2, you do 11, week 3, you do 12, week 4, you do 13. That's progressive overload because every week you've added a rep, or you can add weight. So same example, you do 10 reps body weight, and then you do 10 reps holding a 2 kilo dumbbell, 10 reps holding a 4 kilo dumbbell, 10 reps holding a 5 kilo dumbbell on the 4th week of the program. You've successfully added progressive overload via weight instead of reps, like the previous example. Moving on to rhomboids. So if you don't know, the rhomboids are the mid-back or the major muscle group that we work when we're doing rows in our program. Now, the worst exercise, I legitimately stand by this one too, for your rhomboids is the renegade row. I cannot tell you how much I hate this exercise. It's just under burpees. And I don't know why it's still hanging around in group fitness classes because it's just not an efficient way to train. I get it for sports training. It could have application, but if you're trying to get as jacked as possible and build as much muscle as possible and be as productive as you can with your time in the gym, chuck renegade rows in the bin after you do burpees. After you throw burpees in the bin, don't do burpees. So what a renegade row is, if you don't know, you have dumbbells in your hands, you get in the push-up position, but you don't do a push-up. You balance with your hands on the dumbbells and your feet on the floor as if you're going to do a push-up, but instead of doing a push-up, you do a single arm row. And now while you're doing that row, you're shaking like hell because you're trying to balance with one arm and 2 feet on the ground. You've only got 3 points of contact. And one arm's got a heavy weight in it trying to row. There's many problems with this. Number 1, stabilization. So if you're trying to work stabilization muscles, this could be a solid exercise for you. Don't get me wrong. But number 2, you're not going to be able to do much weight because it's so shaky and it's so unstable. So let's have a look at my training quickly. Single arm dumbbell row, I can do 50 kilos for 4 to 6 reps each side. If you tell me to go on renegade row, even 40 kilos, I would not be able to lift it off the ground because I'm too unstable. I'm not balanced. I'm not able to lift 40 kilos on one side of my body and balance on a dumbbell and 2 feet on the ground. It's just not happening. So if you're trying to build muscle and you're trying to apply progressive overload and make the most of your time in the gym, the renegade row is it's just not a solid option. A great option is a seated row, once again with a neutral grip. A big mistake people will make when they're doing the seated row is grabbing a handle that's really small and tight. It's always on the seated row machine in my gym, and I always take it off, throw it in the basket, and grab a wider grip. I think it's called the D handle. We don't really want to use that. It's not the worst thing in the world if you do. A lot of bodybuilders have used it in the past, but what most bodybuilders are using and what most people are recommending, myself included, is getting a neutral grip handle that's about shoulder width, maybe just a tad wider. And the reason for that is it allows us to get more range of motion when we're pulling the weight back and doing our seated row. So we lean forward for the seated row, we're seated, and we're getting that deep stretch position for our back. And then as we row, because we have a wider grip, we're able to pull all the way back and get that nice range of motion. If we have this little D handle, when we row back, it just hits us in the stomach and stops our range of motion. We want as much range of motion as possible in this seated row. So that's a really good deal for building muscle. And seated row is also a really good way. It's really stable because you're seated, and you can increase the weight slowly. So it's a really good way to apply progressive overload. Really solid choice. Now we're moving on to biceps. One of the worst exercises, and look, I'm prepared to get shit for this, the cheat curls. The cheat curls just don't have a place in my gym or on my clients' programs or in my program. Cheat curls are an ego exercise. Cool, man, you just curled 40 kilos. But what do your biceps have to say about it? Not much, because you're just swinging it up. You're using a lot of momentum. Guys, get momentum out of your bicep training. When you're using momentum, you're taking the tension off your biceps and you're putting it on your hips, if you're thrusting your hips to get the weight up, or your connective tissues. And that is where, excuse my French, shit is gonna snap. We don't want to be hip thrusting the weight up and then slowly lowering it down and then kind of like dropping it really quick. We don't want any quick movements unless we're lifting the weight without momentum. Momentum, all it really does, look, there's a place for a little bit of momentum, but you can tell when someone's using a touch of momentum to when someone's relying on momentum. Very big difference, and your muscles see the difference too. If you're using a ton of momentum, relying on it, like you can't lift the weight unless you swing it up, that's your connective tissues working, not really your muscles as much as they could, or it's other muscle groups jumping in like your hamstrings and your glutes to hip thrust the weight up while you curl it just from the top half. So ego shit, get that out. Cheat curls are a no-go. Look, Arnie did it. Everyone's going to say, Brock, but Arnie did cheat curls and his arms were huge. Yes, they were. Number one, you're not Arnie. Number two, we know that it's not the most intelligent way to train. Now, we want a nice controlled eccentric on the way down and then explode up. But we don't need to explode up with momentum. We just want to control it, make the most, and milk that eccentric on the way down. A really good exercise for biceps, let's just quickly touch on just the standard barbell bicep curl without momentum. That is amazing. Sometimes that is pretty funky on people's wrists, so then you can just go for the easy bar. I find that feels better on the wrist. That's a good option. Or an incline cable bicep curl is really good too. So you have two cables in a cable cell. You bring them all the way down to the bottom. You take one step forward, maybe even two steps forward, because you want your hands or your elbows behind your torso as you stand and get ready to curl. The reason we want it behind our torso is so that our arms are kind of not going straight up and down. They're just slightly back so that our biceps can get a really nice deep stretch. So when our arms are behind our body, we start with our biceps in the lengthened position, which once again, sorry, I can't talk, is where we build the most muscle. And then as we curl up, it's hardest in that lengthened position, which is really good. So the resistance profile of this exercise is absolutely gold. Arms back, and we're just trying to squeeze a pencil in between our elbows, or in between our biceps and our forearms, let's say. So you're just squeezing. We're not moving our elbows forward. We don't necessarily need to. You can in the last couple of reps, but ultimately we want our arms pretty straight and just bringing our hands up to our shoulders as close as they can, and then dropping back down. No momentum, no swinging. That is a really class bicep exercise because it's not just hard at the top or halfway through, it's actually hard right at the bottom in that lengthened position. So it's kind of like the behind the back cable lateral raise that I referred to before. It's one of these exercises that not many people have done, and it's also one of those exercises where you can get a lot of stimulus because you're pretty fresh to it. But even if you are pretty fresh to it, it's an exercise that's making the most of that lengthened position for the biceps, so it's really solid for building muscle. Moving on to the quads, one of the worst exercises that I'm actually seeing decrease in frequency popping up on my feed or people actually talking about it is the sissy squat. And that's ultimately where you jump into this little contraption that keeps your shins perpendicular, but then you sit back into it and you kind of make this 90-degree angle with your at your knee joint. Now, the problem with that, when we're trying to train our quads in the lengthened position at the bottom, we actually want our knees to go over our toes, not really sit at that 90-degree angle. So this exercise for the squat isn't actually ideal. But also with the sissy squat, I don't know if you've tried it, it doesn't actually feel that good on your knees because you're locked into that position, and then you're holding this weight on your back and you kind of sit back and you get this kind of tension in your quads. But I felt more tension in my knees particularly. So for me, that one felt pretty horrible. I tried it and I just gave up on it. I've seen a few people post about it back in the day, but I haven't really seen it in any commercial gyms kind of moving forward. I remember seeing Ulysses Jr. I'm not sure if you follow him. He was a old school bodybuilder that had crazy abs. Well, not old school bodybuilder. He was actually more of a new school bodybuilder, but coming up when I was a teenager, he was on all the forums and simplyshredded.com, and he was signed to some supplement companies, and I saw him everywhere. He was doing the sissy squat quite a lot when I was following him and seeing what he was up to, and he was recommending it and stuff. No one's really saying we should do the sissy squat these days, which is pretty cool. But one of the best exercise for building quads, and this is just really basic. You're going to say, all right, cool, Brock, I knew that. The leg press, but a few changes. So I like the 45-degree leg press. So you're seated and angling up, not the horizontal one where you're going back and forward. I often think you can get better range of motion when you're sitting in that 45-degree leg press as opposed to one where you just push back and forward. I think you can sit nice and deep with the 45-degree leg press. Foot stance. We want to look at putting our heels a little bit lower on the platform so that it replicates us pushing our knees over our toes for our squat. So being nice and upright and getting a very quad dominant squat. With a quad exercise, we want our quads to be the biggest target muscle. Now, if we do a 45-degree leg press but put our heels a bit higher, we're still hitting our quads, but we're not getting much knee flexion or knee over toes, and it can help bring in or bias a little bit more glutes if we have our heels high, because we have a bit more of a 90-degree angle at the knee joint. But we want to bring our heels down so that we get knees over toes and we get a real deep stretch in the quads. And that really helps when we put our heels low. So, and in terms of width, you want to find a width that allows your hips to sit really deep. If we have our feet too narrow, like our heels are low but our feet are narrow, there's no room for our hips to sit into the leg press. They just get blocked by our legs. So if you go wide, a little bit wider, but still with your heels low, you can really sit down. So think of your squat stance. What squat allows you to go ass to grass? What width is your stance? Just replicate that on the leg press, and that's going to be a really good place to start. Moving on to hamstrings. I need to preface this before I get shot by any powerlifters that this is not the worst exercise in the world for hamstrings. But I just want to raise a point. Sometimes you got to do things a bit over the top to get a bit of a response. Conventional deadlift is the worst exercise for hamstrings. Yeah? Now, I don't believe that, but I just want to bring up this point. If you're trying to train your hamstrings, conventional deadlift is not the deadlift option for you. It's a Romanian deadlift or it's a stiff-legged deadlift, straight-legged deadlift. Those are better options for hypertrophy of the hamstrings. Now, a conventional deadlift, you can lift more weight usually, but there's so much central nervous system fatigue that your hamstrings just aren't really going to pop out as the main player, the star of the show. It's just going to be kind of overall fatigue. If you have a massive deadlift session, you don't wake up with really sore hamstrings. You wake up with a sore soul. Your whole nervous system is cooked from lifting a ton of weight. Your back is working, your upper back, your lower back, your forearms from holding the weight. Your hamstrings worked, but your quads also worked. Your glutes worked, your calves also worked. So it's a bit of a whole body exercise. It is a posterior chain exercise, don't get me wrong. Your hamstrings are still very much involved. But if you want hypertrophy, we're talking about the best deal, the best stimulus to fatigue ratio. How much muscle building stimulus do we get for the amount of fatigue that it costs you. And with the conventional deadlift from the floor, doing a significant amount of weight, the stronger you get, the harder it is on your nervous system. So if you do want to just hypertrophy your hamstrings, one of the best exercises you can do is a leg curl, seated leg curl, lying leg curl. But the recommendation that I have here is the barbell Romanian deadlift. And that's simply because it's pretty easy to load and lift heavy weights with, so you get to use your hamstrings in a really strong way. Obviously, if you do it correctly, you can really just load your hamstrings really good, your glutes as well, so you're getting what you want from the conventional deadlift without all that fatigue of lifting such a crazy heavy weight. So one of the best exercises that I'm saying today is the barbell Romanian deadlift. It's really solid. You can also do a Romanian deadlift with a trap bar if you want to. Now, often that's a really good way to learn the movement. So if you're relatively new to deadlifts and someone's like, hey, do a Romanian deadlift, you're like, what the hell is that? I would often teach someone in a trap bar first, because a trap bar or a hex bar surrounds you. So the weight is not just in front of you like it is in a normal deadlift, it actually surrounds you. So it can be a little bit easier on your lower back. Here's a tip for you out there if you're relatively new or if you're a coach teaching beginners. Calves. Now, one of the worst exercises for calves is the seated calf raise. And the only reason is because if you're trying to go for aesthetics and you want bigger calves, you actually want to do standing calf raises, because that's going to hit their gastrocnemius, so the big head, the big diamond-shaped calf muscle that everyone looks at. But if you're doing a seated calf raise, it's actually more focusing on the soleus, which is the bottom part of the calf, which can ultimately kind of just give you thick-looking cankles. I don't know what you're going for, but most people aren't really pursuing cankles. They're trying to get the big calf part. So in terms of best exercises, standing calf raise is one of the best. Now, you can replicate that if you don't have it on the Smith machine. You can just get a step, put it underneath the Smith machine, and then you can create a standing calf raise with the Smith machine being the weight on your shoulders, and then you doing the standing calf raise on the weight. So that's a really good one. Lastly, this is the last point, abs. Now, one of the worst exercises for building muscle in the abs, not necessarily to get a stronger core, but to build muscle in the abs, to cause hypertrophy, is the plank. The plank is an isometric hold. There's no concentric rep. There's no eccentric rep. It's just an isometric hold in that one point. Now, this can be good for coaching core strength, for increasing that core stability. However, for hypertrophy to occur, we want to have that eccentric rep, that lowering of the weight, because that is where we build the most muscle. Well, that is a portion of an exercise where we build the most muscle. And then the concentric rep as well, not necessarily an isometric. Which takes me to the best exercise, the kneeling cable crunch. And let me tell you why. Or any kind of crunch machine in the gym. Now, the sole purpose of our abs, really, to get the best hypertrophy, is to have a crunch motion, to roll up your spine, to bring your head down to your knees. That is what causes our abs to grow. And that's that concentric rep coming down, and then the eccentric is kind of opening up. Now, when we're opening up our head from our knees and bringing that up, if we can load that, that's a really good eccentric rep that we get in core. There's this fallacy in core training that you just have to do a ton of bodyweight crunches and planks and side planks and planks where you're lifting your arms out in front. And don't get me wrong, I've given them to people before. I do program them sometimes. But with hypertrophy to occur in the abs, it's like any muscle group. We don't need to do a ton of bodyweight stuff. Like, no one says, oh, what's the best exercise for chest? And you just go, just push-ups and just heaps of push-ups. Yeah, just do heaps of bodyweight stuff. No one's saying that. They're saying have a balance of of doing barbell bench press, of doing chest press machine, of doing some flies. Have variation, use machines that you can load and progressive overload. That's what people are recommending. And it should be the same with abs, which is why if we do a kneeling cable crunch, we're able to use heavy loads. We're able to, 1 week, do 40 kilos. The next week, do 42. The next week, do 44. The next week, do 46. We're able to apply progressive overload to an exercise that is for the abs, not just do crunches and V-ups and just all this random stuff like Russian twists and just... Because you get to a point in ab training, the bodyweight stuff's fine when you just start. But as you start to progress, it becomes too easy. I can do like 60 crunches in a row. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. I'm wasting my time. I want to do a harder exercise where I can do something like 8 reps, 12 reps, 15, 20, even 30. But if I'm going up to 60, there's about 50 reps there that are just taking up time for me to get to those last reps that are going to count. So the kneeling cable crunch is a really good way for me to apply progressive overload in my ab training. Some other good options for ab training are dead bugs, and you can add weight to them by holding onto a cable, bringing it back and forward. V-ups as well. You can do gar hammer raises. They aren't necessarily weighted, but they're so hard that you can't really do 60 of them. You'll get up to 10, 12, 14, 15 if you're really, really, really strong. You also have candlesticks where you're lowering yourself down. So you come up, you're on your back, you bring your knees to your chest, and then you straighten yourself at about a 45-degree angle, and then you slowly lower them down. That's an eccentric rep. That's really, really, really hard for your core. So if you're doing hanging knee raises and then hanging leg raises and then hanging gar hammer raises and you're looking for harder and harder exercises, the candlestick or the eccentric candlestick is one of the goats of hard exercises that will shred your core up. And there we have it. Those were some of the best exercises to build muscle and worst exercises. Well, not really, guys. I just wanted to kind of have a title to get your attention and have a reason to talk about why some exercises are good for building muscle and why exercises aren't so good, so you can get a better deal when you're training. I'm a parent. Time is scarce. I do my own thing with work. I run my own business. I have things to do. And I know you're just as busy, if not busier than me, sitting down doing this podcast right now. So I want you to get the most out of your training. And the way that we do that is by looking at things like we have looked at in this podcast. I hope it helps. If you have any questions, send me an email, brock@teambrockashby.com. That's my personal email. I see everything. If you have guests that you want on, if you have topics that you want covered, if you have programs that you want to use, teambrockashby.com is my website. You can check it out there. And I'll see you in the next episode.